Alrighty, here we go. Welcome to this video on how to hire for happiness. We are going to cover three different topics. First of all, we're going to talk about how poor hiring practices makes everybody unhappy, and there's a lot of that going on right now in workplaces. I I have the best job in the world because I get to travel around the world and visit a lot of great workplaces and study what they do well. And one thing that I've seen again and again and again is that if you have a happy workplace, they are very intentional about how they hire, how they recruit people. And happiness is part of that process. It's baked into the way they find new people. And we're going to look at I have seven specific tips I want to share. And I want to share some great examples from a lot of these workplaces around the world. Ask me anything in the comments, right? You can write a comment on video or at the bottom of this page. If you're watching this live, I'll take those questions at the end of the webinar. If you're watching later, write a comment on the video, and I'll be happy to respond in writing to that comment. So let's do it. I have a very nice cup of cold brewed iced coffee in a Zappos glass, and why will become clear in just a second. I hope you have your favorite beverage ready. Let's do this thing. Um, but first of all, why does this matter? Why should you hire for happiness? Why is this a topic that matters? And here's why. Because I see this in a lot of workplaces. I see this a vicious cycle of, first of all, you have poor hiring. Yeah. So let's say the company's understaffed. We need to hire people quickly. So instead of hiring well, we just hire fast. Um, that leads to employees who don't really fit into the culture. It leads to employees who can't do their job so well. That leads to to unhappy employees. Yeah, because a lot of people come into the workplace and it's just not working out. This means that people are unhappy at work. This leads to, we know this from a lot of research, leads to high employee turnover. And higher employee turnover means, of course, that you have to hire more people quickly, right? Because you're understaffed. And that leads again to poor hiring decisions. I've seen this in so many workplaces, and it accelerates. It's become a vicious cycle. Poor hiring leads to unhappy employees, leads to more employee turnover, leads to even worse hiring. So that's why this topic is so important. That's why this topic matters. And we need to break this cycle, and we need to make sure that we hire in a way that creates happiness inside the organization, not destroys it. And we can look a lot. I mean, the typical approach here would be to look at systems, right? What's your hiring platform? What kind of systems and processes do you have in place? How do you run interviews? That kind of thing. And then all of those things are important. I mean, you need a solid foundation for all of this. My favorite example, and I'm going to mention Zappos a lot because they do this so well. If you don't know them, online retailer based in Las Vegas. And one of the things that they have the processes themselves are so tight. They're so well designed that they have this 3-day pledge on their website, on their hiring website. And they say that if you've had a call, if you've had an interview, if you've emailed them in any way as part of the recruitment process, they promise to get back to you in 3 days or less. I think that's amazing. And it's one of the problems in a lot of these processes is that hiring is kind of a black hole. Like, you apply and then you don't hear anything back, or you do an interview and don't hear anything back, or if you do get something back, it might be like a form letter that's clearly not personal in any way at all. It's like you're communicating with an IT system more than you're communicating with human beings. That's a huge problem. If you don't believe me, just look at the recruiting hell subreddit on Reddit, where people complain about bad recruiting experiences they've had, and there's a lot of that. Um, and I think it's clear that if recruitment is run badly, it becomes a chore, right? Because we keep having to replace people. It's something we do over and over, and everybody hates it. Nobody's like, yes, I get to run in a job interviews today. Nobody's excited for it. It's a chore. It's something everybody hates. The managers hate it. HR hates it. Applicants hate it. Everybody hates it. And I think we need to break that cycle. And I think that recruiting needs to be something that everybody enjoys, something that brings happiness to everybody involved. The people, that doing the interviews, the applicants, everybody should be able to say that, you know what? this process was actually fun. This process was actually interesting. Maybe I learned something about myself or about this company. Even if I didn't get the job, I still felt like I was seen and valued as a human being in this process. Um, and I think if we can do that, then we can break this cycle. Then we can make sure that we hire people who are happy at work. And as we know from the research, when people who are happy at work, they're happy inside the organization, they do a better job. That way we create better results for the organization. Also, people stay longer in the jobs. We have lower employee turnover, and we don't need to hire as many people. And that way we can be even more deliberate in our hiring choices. And I think that if there's one thing that characterizes happy workplaces is that they're very deliberate about who they hire and who they don't hire. We're also going to talk about that. Um, and like, no matter how busy they are, no matter how understaffed they are, they'll never make a rushed hiring choice. They make sure that whenever they bring somebody in, it's the right person for this job, for this team, for this workplace, for this culture. So let's look at how they do that. And the first thing here is culture match. You may have a great workplace, you may have a great applicant, but maybe that applicant just isn't great for your workplace, right? Every workplace has a culture, whether you have stated it explicitly or not. Your workplace still has a culture, and that's why I think, by the way, you should explicitly state what your culture is, so you can be sure to create that specific culture. But a lot of workplaces don't. But whether you state it or not, you do have a culture, and some people will fit into that culture and other people won't. And there's nothing wrong with that person. There's nothing wrong with that applicant. They just don't fit into your culture. My first job out of university was a classic example of that. I got a job with a Danish company. Nothing wrong with that company. Many people I know worked there for years and were very happy, but I was a terrible fit for the culture. I had all the skills that I needed to do the job, but the way that company worked, the way their processes ran, just did not fit at all who I was, who I am. And I lasted 6 months in that job, and then I quit and went and did something else. Again, going back to Zappos, I have other examples than Zappos, I promise. But going back to them, they're very clear on their 10 values. These are, I'm not going to go through all of them, but like, these are their values. I think they're amazing. I actually think they're amazing because they're not really values, they're actions. You'll notice they're very action oriented. And they want to make sure that when they hire somebody, that those people will fit into this culture, because otherwise they won't last very long. So you'll notice that my favorite value they have is number 3, create fun and a little weirdness. I've been to the Zappos offices, I think, 5 times. I gave a talk there. They're amazing. You can just tell people are having a good time when you walk into the office space. And that's because people fit into this culture. And they want people who are a little weird. They want people who are a little different. They want people with, dreadlocks or tattoos or, piercings or tie-dye t-shirts. They're very explicit. They want you to be weird and a little different. So here's a question they ask in their job interviews. Some questions they ask to make sure that you will fit into that culture. One of them is, how weird are you on a scale from 1 to 10? And I love that question. Again, the specific number might not be as important, but it's about how do you respond to a question like that. And they also usually say like 7 or 8s are, the sweet spot. 9s or 10s are maybe a little too psychotic, and the 2s are maybe a little too straight-laced to work at Zappos. Another question to find out if people will fit into this Zappos culture is, if there was a theme song that played every time you came into a room, what would you want that theme song to be? You can think about what your answer would be. I'm thinking Beethoven's Fifth, da 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 da, and then I walk in the door. That would be amazing. And again, it's not about the specific song you pick. There is no right or wrong answer here. It's about how do you deal with a question like that. If you're like, I don't really know, then you're probably a little too straight-laced to work at Zappos. So that's how they do it. Another great example in this category is Patagonia, makers of outdoor gear and clothes. And they, on their recruitment website, they have this passage that I really like. We seek out dirtbags who feel more at home in a base camp or on the river than they do in the office. We'll often take a risk on an itinerant rock climber that we wouldn't take on a run-of-the-mill MBA. Finding a dyed-in-the-wool business person to take up climbing or river running is a lot more difficult. than teaching a person with a ready passion for the outdoors how to do a job. I think that's a phenomenal way to approach it. So if you're making, mountain climbing gear, ski gear, that kind of thing, you want people who are passionate about the outdoors, who already live there, because those people care about those products. They care about what the company is doing. They're not religious about it. I just love this. I love this passage so much. Of course, we do hire some people strictly for their technical expertise. We have employees who never sleep outside or who have never peed in the woods. Oh my God, I think that's hilarious. So find a way to make sure that the people you hire actually fit into your culture. And that requires looking at more than just the CV, more than just their professional skills, more than just their experience in the field. Excellent. Tip number 2 is to use your existing workplace happiness in your recruitment process. If you already run a happy workplace, and hopefully you do, use that actively. A great example is Middelfart Sparkasse, which is a bank here in Denmark. And I know it looks weird, right? It's called Middelfart. There's a town in Denmark called Middelfart, or in Danish, Middelfart. And they have been voted Denmark's best workplace many, many times. I've visited them several times. I gave a couple of talks there. They're amazing. Like, really good culture, really good workplace. People love working there, even though it's a bank. That's amazing. And they use this actually. So this is their recruitment page, and they talk about, on their jobs page, when they have their job openings, they talk about them being, voted one of the best workplaces in Denmark, best workplace in Europe, that kind of thing. So they use it actively, promote themselves as a happy workplace. And that, I think, is one of the best arguments for attracting more happy people. Say, hey, we're a great workplace. You should come work for us. If you're not a great workplace, don't claim to be. This is not really something you should lie about, but they legitimately are, and they use that actively in their hiring. That was tip number 2. Tip number 3, hire happy people. If you want to create a happy workplace, you shouldn't hire miserable bastards. It's just not going to work. One good example of that is Pret a Manger, or Pret, the British sandwich chain and cafe chain. Their hiring manager said, you can't hire someone who can make a sandwich and teach them to be happy. So we hire happy people and teach them how to make a sandwich. And I think that's a fantastic way to go about it. I will also make it clear that it's not about necessarily hiring people who are already happy. It's about figuring out, will this person be happy in this job that they're applying for? So maybe this person is currently miserable because maybe their current job is awful. They're in a workplace that's just toxic and terrible. So right now they're miserable, but you can tell, by checking them out, that they will actually be very happy working for you. So that's the real question here: is will this person be happy in the job that they are applying for? Or maybe there's another job inside the organization that they would be even happier in. How do you do that? I think a great example is to look at how Southwest Airlines do it. And they say that they hire for attitude and train for skill. I'm pretty sure that if you're applying to be a pilot, you still need to have a pilot's license. Still need to be able to fly a plane. But even pilots need to be nice people. They have to have the right attitude. I've read a story in the book Nuts by Kevin and Jackie Freiberg about this pilot who comes in for a job interview at the Southwest headquarters. And he's really rude to the receptionist, like a real jerk, very arrogant, as some pilots can tend to be. And the receptionist calls up to the HR team and tells them about the experience they just had with this pilot. And he didn't even get a job interview. They were just like, thank you for coming, goodbye. Because they don't want that kind of people working there. How do they approach this? Here's their former president, Colleen Barrett, talking about how they make sure to hire the right people.
We've always thought that a sense of humor was a very important thing for our employees to have. And we've always been told and always asked our employees to take the business very seriously, but not take themselves too seriously. So we like to really check applicants for employment to see if they have a sense of humor. And actually, you might think that's really difficult, but it's really not. It's very easy to see whether someone can enjoy a good, healthy sense of humor. And you might do it by showing up as the interviewer, the recruiter, going out with your clothes on backwards. See if anybody laughs. See if anyone just stares at you like, it's just an everyday occurrence. One of our pilots, we have a lot of our line employees that actually are part of the interview process. And one of our pilots used to pretend that he was an applicant. So he'd sit in the reception room with all the nervous applicants and wring his hands and say, oh my gosh, what do you think they're going to ask us? And go on and on and on. And then the applicant would walk in for the one-on-one interview, and there Frank would be on the other side of the desk. Well, if people can't laugh about that sort of thing, they're just a little too taken with themselves for us to consider them a perfect match for our culture.
Beautiful. I think that's an amazing example. And again, I'm not saying that you need to put your clothes on backwards the next time you're running a job interview. But the thing is, you need to figure out what's your culture like, and how do you make sure that the applicant fits into your culture. And if you want to find out if this is a person with a natural facility for happiness, is this a happy person? How do you figure that out? You can't just ask them, right? I mean, are you a happy person? What are they going to say? No, I'm a miserable bastard. So you need to figure out in a different way. And here's a really interesting question that they also use at Zappos, which is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how lucky are you? And we know from some research that people who consider themselves lucky, who consider themselves fortunate in life, are naturally happier and more optimistic than other people. If again, I think a very job interviews are tricky, right? My good friend Rich Sheridan, the CEO of the founder of Menlo Innovations, tech company in Michigan, says that a job interview is two people lying to each other for an hour. And many of the usual job interview questions suck, right? So where do you see yourself in 5 years? What is your greatest weakness? Yada yada yada. They're like stock questions, and they get stock answers. You don't figure out who that person is. But I think a great way to figure out, will this person be happy in this job, is to ask them questions about specific previous positive experiences. What I mean by that, here's some examples. How about a question like, tell me about the best boss you ever had? That will figure out, what kind of leadership does this person appreciate, and is that something that your company can supply? Tell me about the most exciting project you've ever worked on. Tell me about your favorite coworker you've ever had. Tell me about a task you really enjoyed, or tell me about a situation where you were happy at work. And I think those kinds of questions will really help you figure out what makes this person happy in a job, and then you can decide, then you can try and figure out, is that something that fits with the job they're currently applying for. And also, some people might be, I know every boss I've ever had was a jerk. Every coworker I've ever worked with was an idiot. No, I've never worked on an exciting project. Your work sucks. I hate it so much. And maybe don't hire that person. I don't know. Yes, I will leave that up to you. So that can help you figure out if this is a person who is happy or will be happy in the job they're applying for. Tip number 4, and this is crucial: never, ever, ever hire jerks. They come in and they ruin it for everybody. There's a fantastic book called The No Asshole Rule by Stanford professor Bob Sutton. I highly recommend you read it. It's about the high costs of jerks in the workplace and how they ruin it for everybody else, especially for management positions, by the way. So never ever hire jerks. I think this quote by Dan Jacobs from Apple, I think is fantastic. He says, I'd rather have a hole in my team than an asshole in my team. That is absolutely crucial. So how do you do this? I visited a company in South Africa once, in Cape Town, who told me that they'd had a really bad experience. They'd hired a vice president who turned out to be a complete psychopath, and alienated clients and employees, and then caused so much trouble in just a few months that she was there. So after that, they introduced a new step in the hiring process. So a person would apply. They go through the job interviews, and then there was an extra step, which is the Christmas party test. So the applicant would go out for coffee with the team, right? So if it's a new manager, they will go out with a team they're applying to lead. If it's a person, they go an employee, they go out with the team that they be working in, just like informal coffee, just chatting with that person. And then when the team comes back to the office, everybody has to answer this question, which is, here we go. Um, do you feel like you'd like to sit next to this person at our next office party, our next Christmas party? Um, and if just one person says no, they don't hire that person. And the question is not like, do you love this person deeply? Do you want to be their best friend forever? That's not it. It's like, do you feel like, sitting next to this person at our next company party would be a good experience? And if one person says no, they don't hire them. I think that's amazing. A less formal approach, even more informal approach. I wrote an article about this on my blog way back, and somebody wrote a comment to say that in their tech company, once the applicant has gone through an interview, they're sitting and they're waiting in the waiting room. The team will come in and they'll set up a game of Jenga, um, and they'll insist that the applicant join and play with them. And that's when they find out who that person really is, over like an informal game of Jenga, because then their mind is occupied with somebody else, and you can maybe figure out who that person really is, instead of like the polished facade we all put up in a job interview. One of my favorite examples of this comes from the amazing book, The Customer Comes Second, from Hal Rosenbluth. He talks about the time they were hiring a vice president for the company, Rosenbluth International. And they have this applicant, and he seems amazing. Like, he has got all the right skills, all the right experience. He nails all his job interviews, but there's something about him. There's just something they can't put their finger on, but they're just like, ugh. So what they do is they invite him along to a company softball game. And that's when they figure out who he really is, because he is so competitive, like to the point of being manic. He yells at the opponents. He yells at the umpire. He yells at his own teammates. He kicks up dirt like he's in a Major League Baseball game. He's just a real jerk, and he did not get the job. So finding a way to keep out the jerks is absolutely crucial, because they can cause so much unhappiness and damage once they get into the organization. So how does your workplace do that? Those were some ideas. Tip number 5, involve everyone in hiring. Again, it's if you're hiring a team member for this team, it could be just the manager and somebody from HR running the whole process, but you could also involve the whole team. If you're hiring a manager for the team, I think it makes so much sense that the team decides who their next manager should be, right? After all, they're going to be working for that person. I think that just makes so much sense. How can you do that in practice? I went to Disney World to do a training once. It was amazing. And they told me that at Disney World, they give out these cards to employees at Disney World. And if you spot somebody else, like a family member, a friend, you run into somebody who you think would fit in perfectly, you can give them this card that says, "You've been discovered," with Mickey Mouse on it, and then instructions for how they can apply for a job at Disney World. I think that's brilliant. Involve your existing employees in finding new employees. They know what the work is like. They know probably who will fit in and who won't. I will say, please don't offer hiring bonuses like scouting bonuses. The whole thing, if you help us find a new employee, you get like this bonus. I think that's a terrible incentive. I think it incentivizes the wrong behavior. I think it's much more useful to say, to give people feedback. If you helped us find this new coworker, they've been amazing in their job. Thank you so much. You are brilliant. I think bonuses incentivize the wrong behavior. By the way, my favorite detail: there's a building at Disney World in Orlando, in Florida, where if you're going for a job interview, that's where you go. And these are the door handles from Beauty and the Beast. Isn't that amazing? That's a cute little detail. I love that. Another company that does this really, really well, involving everybody in hiring, is Valve. Valve is a tech company in Seattle. They make computer games, and they run the Steam store where you can buy computer games online. Insanely successful and profitable business. And they put it very clearly. You can find their employee handbook online. In fact, I'll link to it in the materials for this webinar because it's so good. It's brilliant. And they say this: Hiring well is the most important thing in the universe. Nothing else comes close. It's more important than breathing. Um, so when you're working on hiring, everything else you could be doing is stupid and should be ignored. I love that so much. And at Valve, if you want to be involved in hiring, the next person for this job, you can be. In fact, at Valve, people select themselves what projects they do or do not want to work on. So everybody's involved in hiring, and hiring well is the most important thing in the universe. I love that so much. Um, Two more tips. Recruit for purpose. Um, I talk about recruiting for culture. That's great, but also recruiting for purpose. What is your company's purpose? I talk about Patagonia and how they're an outdoor company. And Patagonia exists. The company's purpose is to save the environment. The environment is on a lot of pressure these days. And they do so many things to improve the environment. You can read all about that on their website. I'm going to link to that as well. Um, so that's why, and they use that actively in hiring. They say, if you come work for Patagonia, yes, you get to make cool swimwear or ski gear or climbing gear or whatever, but also your work will help save the planet. And they use that actively as part of their hiring process. The Danish bank I mentioned earlier, Middelfart Sparekasse, do the same thing. They are actually owned by a foundation, and all the profits from the bank go to this foundation that then spends a lot of money to serve local communities where the bank is operating. And they also use that in their hiring process. It's not about, come work with us and you'll have a fantastic career and make a lot of money. It's actually come work for us and you'll help create better local communities. As Patagonia is saying, come work for us and you help create a better world. I think that is a huge part of hiring. And if your workplace has like a clear stated purpose, it's something you need to use in your hiring process. So you attract people who are excited by this mission, excited by this purpose. That's something they care about and want to work to make happen. And finally, my last tip here, tip number 7, is to onboard for happiness. So I think it's crucial that to realize that the hiring process doesn't stop once you've selected a candidate and you've both signed the hiring contract and you have like a starting date. There's a period of time from when that happens to they actually start. And I think the onboarding process starts there. Stay in touch with that person. Why not, have the team members send them a little video, here's where you're going to work. We're excited to see you on your first day. Why not send them like a message, like maybe a nice handwritten letter? We're so excited that you chose to work for us. We can't wait to make that happen. I think so. So that gap between like when they sign on and the first working day, I think that's a great opportunity to create some happiness for that person, to show them they know they're eagerly awaited in this job. And also the first day, I think starting a new job is stressful, right? And I think the first day is crucial, getting that right. And the first few weeks, making sure that people get to be happy at work as soon as possible. And a lot of that is practical, right? If people show up and and people are like, the existing employees are like, oh my God, you're starting today. And there's like no desk, no laptop, no ID card, nothing is ready. They're like, it's complete chaos. That's not a good start, but that still happens all the time. Um, Also, if they're just left alone on their first day, I think being there for them on the first day, being greeted by your coworkers, being greeted by your manager who says welcome. I think that's absolutely essential. Making the first day a good experience. And then there's of course an onboarding process of like training on professional skills and that kind of thing. Again, Zappos, I think, do that really well. If you get a job there, the first month is onboarding, and 50% of that is job training. So specific systems, skills, processes, routines, all of that. But 50% is culture. Making sure that people understand what actions are valued at Zappos and which are not. And I think that's amazing. And then, of course, Zappos does the most amazing thing, which is as part. And I'm not saying every company should do this. In fact, I don't think any other company does it, but I think it's amazing. As part of the onboarding process, they will tell new employees that, we realize that working for Zappos is not for everybody. So if you choose to quit right now, we will pay you $3,000. Yeah, they'll pay people to quit. In fact, they found out that too few people took the offer, so now it's up to $4,000 that they pay people if they quit right now. And this is serious money for a lot of their call center employees. This is like a month and a half salary, maybe 2 months salary. So month and a half probably. So this is something they have to think about. And why is this a good idea? Well, first of all, it makes people actively choose to be there. If somebody's on the fence, I'm not sure this is a job for me. If they're just there for the salary, they're likely to take this and they will leave the job sooner, which is great for everybody. It's great for them and also great for the company who doesn't have to spend more resources trying to, make them happy at work, make them fit in. Um, it also makes the employee more committed because they've now invested. They turned the offer down. They've now invested $4,000 in their future at Zappos. I think that's really smart. That's really smart. But also, this is a great incentive for recruiters to get it right, because if you keep offering the wrong people a job, people who don't fit in, people who've taken the job for the wrong reason, they will all take this offer. You won't have any employees, and you will have cost the company a lot of money. So it's an incentive for everybody to get this right. I think it's brilliant. Speaking of the first day and culture fit, I was spoke at a conference in Sydney a while back, and there was this company that does culture fit surveys. And they told me that one of their clients, they had this culture fit survey for all new applicants to make sure that they, even before they get to a job interview, that they fit the culture. And one of their clients had snuck in a new question, which is this one: what's your favorite afternoon snack? And that might seem like why are they asking that? And there's like, but if you get the job, you find out, because then on your first work day in the afternoon, they make sure they have this snack for you, where it's potato chips or ice cream or cake or whatever. And I think that's just the nicest little detail to show somebody that, what, you're welcome here. We're happy you're here. And we want to help you be happy at work here in our company. It's a tiny little thing, but I just love it so much. So that's my take on this whole thing with hiring for happiness. I think the important thing here is that we become very deliberate about who we hire and who we don't hire. That is absolutely crucial. That we break this cycle, and I would even say that, the busier we get, the more understaffed we are, the more deliberate we need to be about hiring the right people and not hiring the wrong people. And I hope you got some ideas here on how to do that. If you want more information, here are some sources. We have our website or our blog. I will link to all of that, new materials. You can please connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be amazing. You can find us on YouTube. And of course, we have a newsletter on Substack that you can subscribe to. And most of all, if you really, really want to know more about happiness work, you can always book me to come talk in your organization. I'm pretty good at it. The rating for my last 300 talks was an average of 9.6 out of 10. So check that out and see if that could be an option. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will now take your questions. All righty. So I am just checking to see if there are any questions, and yes, I have a couple. Oh, that's a good question. What if you're in a workplace that can't offer high salaries or perks? How do you hire well then? And I think if you're in that situation, let's say maybe a public sector workplace, you can't offer huge incentives, huge sign-on bonuses, that kind of thing, or highly competitive salaries or like a ton of perks. Then it becomes even more important to focus on the things I've talked about here. Focus on the existing happiness in your organization, on the purpose that you're trying, that your company's working, that your workplace is working for. And I think in some ways it might be a little bit of an advantage, because if you are in a position where you can, offer fantastic salaries and sign-on bonuses and huge perks or whatever, then it becomes very likely that you will attract applicants who value those things. Whereas if you just offer, you still need to offer a fair salary, right? One that's, market average. But then if you do that, you are more likely to attract people who value, a good job, a positive mission, making a difference in the world, rather than, people who are just in it for the fancy title or the high salary or the amazing perks. And that can be a good thing because the people who are just in it for the money, for the career, or they will take the job for a 25% raise, but it will also leave the job if somebody else offers them a raise. So that can actually, in some cases, be an advantage. And if you're in that situation, for instance, public sector workplaces cannot offer huge salaries or sign-on bonuses usually. Then it becomes even more important to hire for happiness. And I've seen great examples of that. And final question, how about making sure that the hiring process is fair and unbiased? How does that figure in? And yes, that is hugely important. And again, if we don't take hiring seriously, there is a real risk that we forget things like fighting our inbuilt biases, and then we end up hiring, in our own image, right? That's if somebody looks like you, is the same gender, the same age, the same background, you're gonna like be naturally, yeah, that person is probably awesome. They're a lot like me. They're a good person. And of course, that might be. I'm not saying anybody does this consciously, but it can lead to a bias against minorities, in certain genders, against certain sexualities, that kind of thing. So it's absolutely worth avoiding that. And again, I don't think people do this on purpose usually, but it happens anyway. And that is bad hiring practice. A good example is IKEA in Denmark a few years ago found that they had their stated goal is that the makeup of their staff should match the makeup of the population. And for instance, there are 8% immigrants in Denmark, and they didn't have 8% immigrants on staff. So they made a concerted effort to hire more immigrants, hire more people with other backgrounds than just Danish. And it totally worked. And I think that's super important. And also, I think that's also part of creating a happy workplace is to eliminate bias, right? If you have implicit racial, gender bias, that kind of thing, age bias, for instance, I think it's hard to run a workplace if bias is built. Run a happy workplace if bias is built in. So I think that's a huge part of it. Also needs to be a part of the conversation. And then, of course, again, then you also need to create a culture where people can be happy at work in your workplace, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of age. It's not good enough to have hiring practices if then people are mistreated badly if they're older or minority. So absolutely a huge part of it as well. Excellent. Let me just check and see if there are any final questions. There are not. Well, in that case, thank you so much for joining, for watching this video. If you do think of a question, write a comment on the video and I'll be more than happy to answer that. Stay happy.